Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Cloudebate that we're hosting again here at the University of Johannesburg. And for those of you who have been with us before know that this is all about the fourth industrial revolution. And tonight we're going to talk about higher education with regards to the fourth industrial revolution. And as some of you who were with us the last time we hosted a Cloudebate here know that we talked about academic research with regard to the fourth industrial revolution and what happens with the academic thesis and is it obsolete. Tonight we're going to take that topic further, but we're going to focus much broader. And as I say, we're going to talk about the role of higher education with regards to the fourth industrial revolution. And we're going to focus on research, we're going to focus on the curriculum, we're going to focus on teaching and learning and how we interact with our students. But also, very importantly, the resources needed to fulfill the mandate that we have set ourselves to take higher education into the fourth industrial revolution. And I have a fantastic panel with me tonight that I would like to introduce. But first, my name is Ylva Rodney-Gomerde, and I'm a professor of communication studies here at the University of Johannesburg. And to my right, I have Professor Moketsi Letseka from the University of South Africa, not Johannesburg, University of South Africa, UNISA, where he is the UNESCO Chair of Open Distance Learning. And he's also the editor of Africa Education Review and has focused his research and a lot of efforts on trying to forge partnerships between higher education institutions and the private sector with regards to ICTs, nanotechnology, and computer science, for example. A very, very warm welcome to you, Professor Letseka. It's lovely to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm humbled to be here.
No, it's lovely. And right next to Professor Letseka, we have our Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, I should say and emphasize, Professor Chilitsi Mavala. A warm welcome to you, Professor Mavala. And I know that a lot of our audiences who have been with us before know you, and a lot of us do. And coming out of engineering and having worked in a sort of multidisciplinary research trajectory that spans everything from artificial intelligence to computer sciences and computational technology to the social sciences, and I know even to medicine, you are absolutely apt to talk to some of the issues that we will be discussing tonight.
Thank you very much.
And I must say as well that you are also a member of the newly actually formed presidential committee on the fourth industrial revolution. So yeah, that will be interesting to follow the work that you will be doing. And a colleague of yours on that presidential committee actually with regards to the fourth industrial revolution, Professor Chris Ardendorf, will be with us a little bit later tonight as well, as he was held up at the airport. And he is a professor, Professor Ardendorf I should say, is a professor of future studies at Nelson Mandela University and works on issues around the fourth industrial revolution and the future, and working towards the future in South Africa and the fourth industrial revolution. So we will welcome him as he joins us as well. But without much further ado, I'd like to turn to you, Professor Letseka, and start the discussion off by saying university education, higher education, and the fourth industrial revolution. What should we concern ourselves about? What is it about?
Look, the fourth industrial revolution is I would call it a very fascinating era. It's an era that puts us, locates us, everybody else into the digital frame, and the technological developments, the changes that this brings, the way information, communication, the transfer of knowledge, all these digital technology has made that quite. It's brought in a very phenomenal way in which information diffuses and goes around. And I think that's a challenge for universities. How do universities then keep up with that? The trouble with most universities is universities tend to be traditional. They tend to hold on to the old ways of doing things. And I think this is the key. The key is how do we get universities to begin to not only embrace but to be part of the change processes that are taking place, because the fourth industrial revolution is a new thing. I mean, it's taking the world to a different limit. I just came and drove from Pretoria this time, just to give you a brief example, and I'm driving a vehicle that when I approach another, it screams at me. It's artificial intelligence. It basically warns you, don't get too close. And these are the things that we need to be, how do we as universities begin to get into that level of science, that level of technology, that level of advancement? How do we build that into our curricula so that the kind of crop of young and imagined learned people that come out of the university are not left behind, but they are part of this revolution and evolution.
I find that fascinating, and you picked up on two things. It's advancement, you say, but then also you say universities are maybe not a little bit cautious in some of these spaces. Would you agree with that, Prof. Mawala? Are we really that cautious? Are we not doing the advancement?
No, I think it's a yes or a no. Some universities are obviously cautious. Some universities are anticipating the fourth industrial revolution and they are preparing for it. Some of them are actually participating in it. Some universities are not in it because of financial reasons. You know. So I think what you're going to see emerging going into the future, you're going to have a dual world where universities will be embedded in the fourth industrial revolution, wholly or partially. Because you are going to have universities that are going to remain as bricks and mortar. I do not imagine that University of Johannesburg will become a completely virtual university alongside its peers such as Harvard and Oxford universities. So, and then the other universities are going to be completely virtual. You are going to have universities that have no single building. They are completely virtual. The courses are going to be done virtually, and it's not just going to be virtual. It will be using virtual reality to bring that experience that normally somebody will get when they actually go to university. So yes, we are ready here at the University of Johannesburg for the fourth industrial age.
And I can see that, and we have, you know, the Cloudebate that we started is exactly that, to try to capture some of that and actually sort of take a step towards that advancement. But you talk about completely virtual universities that also then uses virtual reality to further the education project. Having been in open distance education for a long time, and I know this is really your field, Prof. Leteka, can you see the virtual university? What will it be? Will I as a lecturer be obsolete in that space?
Professor Mawala has touched on a very interesting piece of information. In distance education, we speak about blended teaching and learning, in which we recognize that we have the hard tools, the brick and mortar, the library, the books, but also the fact that we can engage with our students online. So a combination of all these approaches makes it easier to say the 50-50 split he's talking about. It gets realized in the blended learning mode. The blended learning mode recognizes that there are moments when students need to be in buildings to read books, or even if it's electronic, but they need to be on their own. But there are moments when they have to see on screen and have conversations. But there are moments when they need to actually have an interaction with their lecturers and tutors, so that the conversations can actually be humane, be intimate. So I like the idea of that 50-50 split. And at UNISA, we are pursuing that. There's a whole initiative now to say, how do we drive the blended learning mode in ODL? We are virtually open distance learning, but we do have provision where we meet with our students. And that's where the combination of both the virtual and the personal interaction come into play.
So in some ways then, it's sort of the open distance education model lends itself quite well to this. And I'm going to turn to you now, Prof. Mawala. So being a residential university like we are, the University of Johannesburg, what steps do we need to take to move towards maybe not a complete virtual model, because as Prof. Leteka also says, that, you know, that human element is really important, but what other steps we sort of starting to see or that we need to take?
Well, I mean, he has already talked about blended learning, which we are also pursuing as a residential university. Flipped classrooms, because much of what students learn in the classrooms is actually on the internet, in the forms of videos, and very often by world experts. So sometimes there's no need for us to be teaching these students when they come to the classrooms. So in flipped classrooms, you expect the students to actually view those videos to prepare for classes. And when they come to the classroom, instead of sitting down and listening to a lecturer, then you have a conversation, you have a debate on what all these things that they have just learned on a video actually means. And by the way, this is what education truly is. The idea of sitting down and one person giving you knowledge actually is not good for innovation. Innovation is about questioning things. It is about interrogating things. And we are going to bring questioning and interrogation into the classroom because we have online materials that are already available. Our labs, for example, virtual labs. By the way, you can actually be able to do virtual interaction. Because now, when I was a student, if I had a project, and we'll have group projects, my group mates will be people in my classroom. Now, because of the fourth industrial revolution, we can be able to put people in a classroom, give them a project in a group with one person in Tokyo, another one in Beijing, another one in Stockholm, another one in the United States, almost playing the sort of things that people who are going to form multinational companies or work for multinational companies are actually going to experience. So we want to bring that experience to the classroom so that when they go out there in the fourth industrial age, they are not going to fail, but they're going to succeed.
It's interesting, and there are a lot of actually things coming through now from our online audience picking up on this. And I think that it's interesting because what you're talking about here, Prof. Mabala, is in a sense what actually Johann Strauss, one of our online participants, talks about as pooling resources. You know, so it's not only pooling resources maybe, but pulling resources together. And I think that that's something that's really interesting, and that's something that I hope we can do. But the resourcing, do we have the resources to both to pool but also to pool all of these things together?
Is it for me?
Yes. Well, you feel free to dive in.
Look, I work for a very monstrous institution, and Professor Marala will bear with me. I mean, UNISA, it's scary. We have a student intake in excess of 400,000. That's quite huge. How do we reach out to the students? That's a dilemma. How do we reach out to the students? How do we create an enabling environment for them to flourish, to engage, as Professor Marala just said? UNISA, because of its size, there are lots and lots of initiatives that are being put in place. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about here is that UNISA has established what's called a learning management system. It's called My UNISA. It's not a perfect, but it's a platform where students engage. And it's a platform that allows students, lecturer, e-tutors to come together and to engage, to share ideas, to interrogate information, to debate, to critique. But UNISA also has a whole series of regional video conferencing and satellite broadcasting facilities. We are very fortunate because we have centers across the provinces, but we also have a satellite campus in Addis Ababa, in Ethiopia. Amazingly, we could be having a class here and we are having students in Addis who are partaking in the discussing and engaging. But there are now also what are called regional telecenters to create. Professor Marala spoke about computer centers. UNISA has now contracted a lot of service providers in the region who provide computer laboratories so that our students can go in. One of the debates that went on here, which I want to touch on, was an issue about whether we can have these facilities, but how are we doing it in terms of data? And that's one of the challenges that we meet at UNISA. We service mostly students that come from the rural communities because, you know, unlike UJ, unlike VETS, I think we're even being crept at in terms of our admission policies because we are an access institution. And that also puts us on the back foot because we are dealing with usually predominantly more disadvantaged students. And the challenge is how do we, you know, we can get laboratories into the rural areas, but if you cannot create provision for data to be readily available, the labs can simply become white elephants. And that's a debate that we are having at UNISA right now. In a session that I gave to the university's senior executive management, I spoke very strongly on how we need to set up a crack team that will engage the cellular providers. I'm really concerned about the Vodacoms of this world, the MTN, the cellular. What would be their corporate social responsibility in terms of subsidizing data? Because data is the only way through which our students can then get online. And unfortunately, believe you me, there are I think over 70% of our own people in South Africa who come from disadvantaged communities who may not have access to, or even the resources to access the data. How do we reach out to those? And I think for me at UNISA and the team that we work with, we have come to a decision that it's important that we engage these multinational cellular providers to say, where is your responsibility? And that's a very key. But moving on to that, we also at UNISA, we have established what is called an integrated tutor model. We have a team of e-tutors that reach out for students. But I think the idea then is to create, as Nadima was saying, that team that engages with the students on a regular basis. That team that says, if you have read a piece here, what's your understanding of it? What are the assumptions? How do you see it? And e-tutors, like tutors in a normal institutions, their job is there to quiz the students so that they can begin to engage in more critical manner. I mean, information is there, but when you get people to be critical about it, they begin to see other curvatures about it, and that's the key. So our e-tutors, we send them through a whole range of regular training to say, you need to have that epistemological base, the pedagogical knowledge, absolutely.
And that is important, and I think that, you talk a little bit about, providing access, as you say, and actually engaging their maybe cellular providers, and I think that, and I know that this is something that we've had a lot of debates around at University of Johannesburg as well, and Prof. Mawala, this idea of how do we also, create policy? How do we lead from the front? And I think that's important in this space, and I want to put that to you. How do we get at that forefront?
Absolutely, I think that is quite important. I think there is an element of infrastructure that we have to deal with. Fast internet is very, very important. And when you go to many of our rural areas, and when you go to the rest of the African continent, the internet becomes slow.
Yes.
So the reason why it becomes slow is because the investment that has been made has not been enough. Data is expensive. I wrote an article on Forbes Africa just this month where I was saying that data is the new gold.
Yes.
Very, very important, so we need to see how we can be able to ensure that our people have access to data. And universities will have to negotiate with suppliers of data, of means of communicating data in order to bring down the cost of data. The issue of digital inclusion.
Yeah.
Our students must be ready for this. At the University of Johannesburg, we are giving our first-year students, every first-year student, access to some form of a device. This is one way of ensuring digital inclusion. Is it enough? No. Now we need to make sure that the right softwares are at their disposal.
Yes.
The cost of software is another issue that we need to think about. And I think as the African continent, we need to move towards what is called open source software. We need to move towards what is called open source textbooks, because electronic textbooks are very, very expensive. But you do have another library of textbooks almost in all areas. But these textbooks are free. We need to think about how do we make some of the information at our websites much more accessible. The issue of zero-rated websites also becomes very, very important.
It's interesting because we also have comments coming from online who actually says, and it's Tariq Ali who says, data should be a basic right. And maybe that's actually true. We are so pleased to have you here. Professor Chris Adendorf. I actually introduced you to our online audience earlier
Thank you.
as
My
a futurist
apologies.
and Professor of Future Studies at
That's good,
the
yeah.
Nelson
Thank you
Mandela
very much.
University. Thanks for coming.
Thanks
and I
very
believe
much.
that
My
you've...
apologies for being late.
yeah, we should have had you virtually here instead.
In
now
2 or
you
3
are.
years' time, a hologram will be here.
Exactly, exactly.
I think to address our VC's very valid points, VC, what you're making, because at the end of the day, we need to make access to data available to everyone. I think the rollout of 5G and what's coming will sort of help us on that rollout, VC, because at the end of the day, you know, it's like 4G, it's expensive. But I think the rollouts with 5G and what's happening in the States and countries like Spain, especially China, things like, the cost of data is coming down drastically. Because in 4G, it works like the AM waves, you know, it's like long waves, 15 millimeter waves, whereby 5G is going to more or less work like your FM waves. So it's going to be millimeters of fraction. So the speed of it and the cost of it, especially with the M boxes, the 5G M boxes, I think that's going to assist us in the future quite a bit, bringing the cost down. 95% of my work I do in the rural areas, we see, and that's my biggest challenge is how to get the, access to Wi-Fi, access to data, because I've seen it with my own eyes in the most rural areas where I work. Some of the tiny little kids, 3, 4 years, they've never seen a cartoon in their life because there's no access. So it is a big problem, but especially for our students going forward. I think access, like our VC was writing in an article a week ago, data is gold. It's a new gold at the end of the day. And it's a true reality, especially within the fourth industrial revolution.
It's interesting because we talked a little bit then as you came in about data as a basic right, and then we talked as well about the role of universities. So yes, we can talk about it, and actually it's Jonathan online here who says that I think we are far away from data being a basic right in this country. We are still struggling to make the switch to digital TV from analog, for example. Do we have a role as universities here to lead? We talked about leading from the front, influencing policy. What can we do then to actually ensure that we can provide easy access to data for our students? Or do we have a role there, or do we have to rely on other structures?
Well, we certainly have a role to play, but we cannot completely on our own deal with the issue of data alone. In South Africa, we have bodies that are supposed to oversee this. We have ICASA. ICASA has to come to the party. We have producers suppliers of communication channels, such as Vodacom and so on and so forth. They need to invest in technology. 5G, you know, they need to invest in such technologies. And it should not just be invested in urban areas. Of course, South Africa has a model to deal with the issue of investment into the rural areas. We have an organization called the Universal Services Agency, which is supposed to, it collects some form of a tax from cellular providers, and its role is to go and make investment in those areas where it does not make any commercial sense for these cellular companies to invest. So we also have policymakers. The department must also come to the party. We as university, we can be able to advise. We can be able to advise as to what is the best way in which we can structure our system in South Africa so that data becomes affordable, the infrastructure become efficient, and we are able to get our people to the digital age.
I mean, it's interesting. It's Klaus Lombardozzi online who says that, but we can't even provide water and electricity to everyone. And now we talk about data for everyone. And it's a little bit what you talked about, Professor Adendorf, about working in rural areas. Prof. Letseka, you have touched upon it as well.
Absolutely.
Students, you know, coming to university. I mean, we see that in our own context here at the University of Johannesburg as well. And I wonder sometimes if the students, if we're not then telling our students that now we're leaping into the fourth industrial revolution, and at some point someone will turn around and say, but listen, you know, Professor so-and-so, I have need of water, electricity where I come from. I don't know. Chris, do you have any?
I agree with you. It depends when it's off campus or on campus or off campus. On campus, we have access, and the students do have access. The problem comes if it's off campus. So there the student actually physically sit and study, but now he doesn't have access to data, and he doesn't have access to information, and he can't do research. That's where the big problem is. So one has to work out strategies, but I agree with our VC. At the end of the day, the university's role is for policy. The university's role is not to give free data. We can assist as much as we can and things like that. But the same like with government. Government is their policy. It's like government mustn't provide jobs. Government must set a platform to make for ease of doing it. So I think in that context, we have to look at it in that context. But access to data and access to information is critically important. And it is a problem. It's actually a huge problem, especially off campus for the poor. So we have to work out strategies how we move forward. But I'm very confident that in 24 months, 36 months, where 5G starts rolling out properly, that kind of problem will sort of assist. But there's also new products, like what's going to follow up on Wi-Fi. There's a product called Li-Fi. So I would argue that certain of the students must Google it. It's going to make access to data even more cheaper. In the future, access to data will almost be for free.
That sounds fantastic, and I think that it's, you know, we're talking about resources, and there's resources, then we talk about data technology and so on. But I want to hear all three of you. I'm going to ask you the same question. So other resources, I think, are needed as well. The human resources, do we have the capacity? So myself then, as a professor of communication studies, I interact in a particular way, like any other lecturer, I guess, with my student. But what skills do I need as a lecturer and as a professor at the university to take my students and my teaching into the fourth industrial revolution? I'll start with you, Professor Luteka, and then I'll come to Prof. Mavala and Prof. Adendorf as well.
This is a very curious question.
Curious, is it?
Yes. Because one of the things that one of the key issues that I do as the holder of the UNESCO chair is to focus on the capacity of staff in order for them to be responsive to this very era that we are in. And I'm saying curious because you are asking a question that actually follows into what is it that I do at the chair. Key to what you are doing, and it's an assessment that we did at UNISA, and I'm sure Professor Morale and Professor Adendorf will know this, that you in a university you have people like us. I'm in the 60s, but I still see myself as a technologically challenged person, in a sense that I'm surrounded by millennials. My secretaries are 22 and 30. My kids are in their 40s and 30s. I have grandchildren. So you can imagine technology is what actually permeates my house. I cannot fall behind in technology. However, when you go to a university like UNISA, for example, there is a whole, and I think former minister, he's back now by the way, in education, Blaine Zimande. Yes. He used to lament the issue of the Asian professoriate and how do we replace them. At UNISA, that's a key issue. We have this generational issue where the generation of scholars that are about to get out and retire, they are not prepared to get into the technology. They are basically not willing to unlearn the old ways and to learn the new ways. And that's key. So my goal as the chair, and which is why what I articulated to UNESCO, is that I see the chair as coming in to galvanize a drive towards developing capacity in digital literacy. I've demarcated 4 or 5 forms of literacy: digital literacy, digital proficiency, digital fluency, and digital competency. And I argue that if we can have a new crop of people that can begin to embrace these forms of literacy, digitally speaking, this is a crop of scholars, researchers that will be able to engage with the new generation of students that we have. Our younger students are into technology, there's no question about it. I mean, I have a 10-year-old grandson at home. My late wife was sitting in watching television and the screen was like this. You know, you have corners. And he says, "Grandma, can I have the remote?" And the screen. So he says, "What did you do?" "Oh, never mind, just enjoy the TV." And that's the kind of thing that you're talking about. You need young people, and you need to find generations of scholars that will be in tune with them. And that capacity is very, very important. We cannot expect that this forms of digital literacies will just fall from the air. There must be initiatives to get them on. We need to get people to begin to utilize the resources. And at UNISA, our learning management system is online, it's my UNISA, but it's got facilities there for video conferencing. But I can assure you, not many of our lecturers are utilizing those tools. We need to get people, once people are comfortable, they will then be creative, be inventive, and be reaching out to students. And students are eager to engage on a screen level and to basically see the face, and we need to encourage that. So yes, the capacity is something that we need as universities. And Marola says we develop policies, we develop pedagogical aspects. Our job is to make sure that we develop creative programs that ensure that we can then speak comfortable, that we are on the right platform of having that critical mass of people with the requisite skills to drive and be responsive to the era in which we are.
Prof. Marola, would you agree with that? What are the sort of human resources that we need to look towards?
No, absolutely. I think we need human resources that are competent in the skills that are needed for the fourth industrial revolution. The World Economic Forum actually did a comprehensive study to figure out what are the sort of skills that we need in order for us to thrive in the fourth industrial revolution. They identified skills such as problem-solving skills, creativity, ability to deal with people, ability to understand that we are no longer just humans. We are human machines people. We cannot operate without our smartphones. We cannot operate without our computers, you know. To understand the psychology of that. Now, and the ability to learn continuously. Learning is a skill because the pace of change is so rapid that if you do not have the fluency of learning, you are definitely in trouble. Now, given all those skills, what sort of human resources do we need in our academics in order for them to be able to impart such skills? Of course, they should also be fluent in all those skills. You know? And the formula, I think, is that our education must become much more multidisciplinary. Because the fourth industrial revolution is not just about technology. It's about technology interfacing with human beings and ultimately with society. And the understanding of that and directing it so that we can increase our economic well-being as a country. Now, how do you impart such skills on people who were minted in the 70s, Professor, and the 80s? You know?
There you go.
You know, and that is why, certainly at the University of Johannesburg, we have online programs that are specifically designed to give the existing staff who were trained in the 90s, I was trained in the 90s and 2000s, so that they can be fluent in these things. Continuous education is actually key. In fact, as universities, we must actually expect our staff to say that every 3 years, you must be able to come and demonstrate and say, this is the course that I have studied. And these are the sort of skills that I have learned.
I think that's interesting, and I'm going to turn to you now, Professor Adendorf, as well. And I'm going to put it out there that it used to be, and I've said this many times before, that we used to be, as lecturers, an interface with our students, and we used to interface with technology and then interface with our students. Now that is a seamless process, isn't it so? That we're interfacing, interacting, and it's collaborative, and it's sort of, you know, it's multi-layered, but it's also happening in real time and as a continuous flow. And I think that's really interesting. And what are the skills that we need in that to be able to seamlessly interface?
That's a very interesting question, and I must say our students, and the students of the future, is actually our clients. And everything in this world works around supply and demand. It's as simple as that. The plurality is always supply and demand. So we have to ask ourselves now, and I call the current kids that study at university, kids of the screen. And even the little kids growing up, all from the screen. They grew up in a different era. We see, I teach them the thumbs are this size. They type with their thumbs. We still type, us oldest type with our fingers and things like that. So we need to cater for that kids of the screen, because they think differently, completely differently. And on top of that, for them, the cognitive abilities, for them is to be logged on all the time. And we need to cater for that. But if we don't understand that kind of technology and how they interact with that kind of technology, if it's outside our paradigm, we shouldn't even be there. So we need to adapt, because the fourth industrial revolution, what brought about the fourth industrial revolution, is the application of smart technologies, whether it's physical, digital, or biological. And it changes business models.
Yeah.
So in the future, it changes the business models, so it changes companies of the future. The jobs of the future is going to change. It's argued that by 2030, 2 billion jobs that's existing in today's market will not be there in 2030.
Yeah.
So it's not to say it's and there'll be 8 billion people on Earth. Not to say it's just a quarter of the world, because not 50% of people are working. So, and 60% of jobs towards 2030 haven't even been invented yet, because of the exponential growth, this fast pace of time. It's argued that the changes we can experience towards 2030 will be more so felt in the last 300 years of mankind. So now we're moving into the fourth industrial revolution with all these new technologies, and we as lecturers, we can't adapt. Then we need to look at our business models and how do we need to adapt.
Yeah.
And their creative thinking and their creative mind. So it's very, very important that we look at what is the job market, like the two esteemed professors were saying.
Yeah.
We need to determine that. And we need to have a careful look at what are the drivers, not even for 2030, what are the drivers for 2020? What are the drivers for 2025? Those exponential growth is immense, and we need to adapt. I've seen it with lecturers, they don't even know how to log on. Now, how can you expect?
Not here at the university.
I've
Here
seen
we
it-
log on, as you know.
I've seen it in my own eyes where economics teacher, lecturers trying to explain a model, where the kids rather go on YouTube. And then they know the answers already.
I think, and that there might be, people watching online or people listening and tuning into the debate that's wondering as well, that sometimes I think that we also use a language maybe here of this quick advancement and fast-moving thing that scares people. And shouldn't we rather bring people along with us by talking about some sort of an augmentation, enhancement of skills and of learning experiences, and somehow start small? Or do we need to take giant leaps, Professor Mavala, or can we start small and work ourselves up?
Well, I think it should be the combination of all those things. There will be other people who will be forced to move faster, because certainly the world is moving faster. So if we move slow when the world is moving faster, we shall be left behind. So many of us are going to be forced to try to catch up with the pace at which things are actually moving. And I think what has happened in the past, in the last few years, is that knowledge has been democratized.
Yes.
You no longer have to have a fancy library to have access to knowledge. There was a time when if you wanted to know what nuclear fusion is, you had to go to some big library and look for a book, and many times the book was not even there. They had to borrow it from elsewhere. Now, all that knowledge is at your fingertips. So what we need to do, and I will go back to that skill that I talk about, the skill of being able to learn on your own is very, very key for survival in the fourth industrial age. Let us continue to learn. Let us improve ourselves. Let us make sure that we read. At the University of Johannesburg, you will know, we have a Vice Chancellor's reading group, where each month I read a book and I invite staff and students to discuss the book. The reason for that is because I believe that continuous learning is extremely important. I believe that skilling people to embed into their DNA, so to say, the culture of reading and discussing what they have read and interrogating the ideas that they have just absorbed is actually very, very important for the fourth industrial age.
And actually, it's interesting that you mentioned the book club, for example, or the reading group, and where we actually continue discussions online as well, and it becomes a learning community in that sense. And That's important, and I think that you touched upon something earlier as well, Professor Mavala, that I'm sure that both Professor Oldendorf and Professor Liseka can talk to as well, and that is this idea, not only to learn yourself, but that continuous learning also talks to innovation, hey? And a creativity and openness of mind, that I think that that is a new mission, isn't it, for a university?
It is. I mean, this is why when you look at the DNA of distance learning,
Yeah.
The key expression or phrase that we use is that we are driven by lifelong learning principles.
Yes.
Our belief in distance learning is that learning never stops. It doesn't stop. And to basically get back to Prof. Marala, if we cannot get to that level where the culture of reading, I mean, I grew up in the 50s where my father used to, before he used to put a pillow here and read. There's a book that you read and then they put a marker. Tomorrow they go and do their work. The following evening he comes out and gradually, at the end of the week, he will tell you, hi, we have read this, and comes out and shares. We need to have that. But that culture of reading, now, in the fourth industrial revolution, it's very essential because it allows us, not, as Professor Mora said, not to be left behind, but to be on a continuous learning trajectory, to be continuously enriching ourselves, to be creative, to be able to be responsive to this fast change. You are saying the change is frightening. Yes, it is frightening. And if we cannot prepare ourselves to, or our people or people that we are teaching to be more responsive to change, surely places like the Eastern Tigers, I mean, we're going Finland. These are countries that are going to live. The Australians are known to be high readers. We need to get to a level where we encourage our own people to read. The only problem now, and coming back to what Prof. Marara was saying earlier, is that our youngsters are more glued into seeing things as they come in videos. And I remember we used to read. You read a whole play on Shakespeare. Now they watch it on a video. They don't even bother to read. But so the struggle is, how do we match the two? Videos make it very easy to listen and to follow. But reading, for me, it's how you get those neuro elements of the mind to work. It's an engagement.
So
And I think we need to find ways of saying, how do we find that balance where videos are important, but reading is also valued, because it's a skill, it's a habit.
And
it's
as
a
you
culture.
say, it's multi-platform then,
Absolutely.
it's multidisciplinary, as you said, Professor Mavala. And I'm going to turn to you now, Professor Adendorf, and as someone who points out a line. Not only are there all of these things, but it's also so that, of course, this talks to graduates. Not only, we're not necessarily preparing them for jobs anymore. We're preparing them for them creating a job market. That's what we need to do. And that job market takes different forms, but also the university will take different forms. Someone says, Starbucks, will they offer degree? Someone says online here, you know,
Very interesting.
Highly probable. I think they're very, very right if they say the university of the future is going to change exponentially.
Yes.
Because I do believe that universities takes too long to adapt. But where you have your micro-training colleges springing to life, and they're already gearing to teach people to switch professions. And what we take for 3 years to train, to teach the kids, they're doing it in 6 months. So the University of the Future is going to change exponentially. As I mentioned earlier, and everything works around supply and demand. The people's not going to wait for us. Companies are going to start training them skills, do training themselves, just to switch professions in the correct directions. Because it's critically important with the technological advancements that we're getting, is that the adaptation that's needed. It needs new skills, revitalizing of skills. So your future human resources and education will change completely. I mean, Prof, you were mentioning about UNESCO.
Yes.
You must probably know Professor Swahili Nayatullah,
We
the
are-
world
we are
#1
engaged.
futurist.
Yes.
He did an exercise with students, where the students can't wait for the new generation lecturers and teachers. They were arguing that we'll have them in 2025, a student choice of teachers and lecturers. They will argue freelance teaching, apps, UTEX, where they can sit at home and do it. And it's not that far-fetched. If you think about it, a lot of campuses in South Africa and internationally, and if you look at Spain, you can actually sit in your bedroom and the lecturer lectures everything for you. So the way that's going to change, I'm a bit concerned that I think our university is taking too long. This is micro-training colleges, this is pop-up, giving short learning programs, doing better business models, adapting quicker, more technologically advanced. I think we have to be very careful for that type of thing. And also in the workplace, that the workplace will find that university is not really catering for what their needs are. And this is where we have to be very quick on our toes. Because as I mentioned once again, everything works around supply and demand. If the universities can't supply what the demand is, it's next. Who's next?
And that is important. So how do we keep up with that? I mean, I think that's the question here. So what can we add that these micro colleges, for example, can't add, and how can we best utilize the human capital that we have and the knowledge base that we have, and link that back to some of these new platforms and how do we?
No, absolutely. I think what is going to happen is that many jobs are not going to require some form of a degree. So they will require certain types of skills.
Yes.
What universities actually have, which is quite advantageous, is that they have a multidisciplinary platform that these colleges will not be able to offer.
Yes.
Because it is pretty clear now that the computer scientist of the future will have to be proficient in issues of people.
Yes.
For example, in technological development, you have something called natural language processing.
Yes.
And the computer scientists are taught this thing. And you can go to a college that can actually be able to teach you these things in 6 months. But the real education that university is going to give, it's to say, in addition to the programming proficiency that we teach you, go and learn linguistics, which obviously becomes a very important part of natural language computing. In fact, our Google Maps tells us that this is very, very important, because Google Maps performs very, very poorly on pronouncing our street names, because somehow those computer scientists, Silicon Valley, did not think that maybe we should go and record people in South Africa saying their street names, and when they are using their Google application in South Africa, because automatically you know where you are, then we can be able to do that. So multidisciplinarity is going to be very, very important for university. And then the second thing is that we don't really know what skills are going to be needed into the future. And I suppose this is what makes micro colleges problematic, because they teach you a skill. That skill might actually not be valid in 5 years. So broader education, which to me is very simple. You need to know some form of ability to manipulate numbers. You need to be able to understand language. You need to be able to understand logic. If you can be able to master those 3 things, and you have an aptitude for continuous learning, you can be able to absorb any skill that is going to come. And when I look at some of these micro colleges, I realize that they are actually too specialized in an era where we want people to understand a little bit more than their exact expertise that they want to
think that's interesting, because on the one hand we talk then about multidisciplinarity, a new skill set which is then not only talks to multidisciplinary sort of an integration of what, as you say, the critical thinking skills, learning by yourself. But in some ways we're also becoming quite specialized, but not necessarily on those practical skill sets. And I was in conversation on an overseas trip with the Vice Chancellor of a business school, and he says to me, we don't teach business, we do business. And in a sense, that's what we should be doing. We should be doing humanities, or we should be doing, computer science in a sense, rather than teaching it maybe. I don't know, Professor Luteka, is that what you're doing at UNISA?
We have a very interesting development at UNISA. There are lots and lots of colleagues. I speak for the College of Education because the UNESCO chair is located in the College of Education, who have completed doctorates in technology assistance. And my complaint has always been that I think they spend a lot of time talking about technology, and they spend little time doing technology. And for me,
Yes.
that's the key. We need to find a balance. Professor Mara is absolutely right. The epistemology, the pedagogical aspects are key. But at the same time, the doing part of it is also critical. And when we create synergies, when we bring the energies so that the intellectual capacities that we have can then manifest in the actual doing, then that's where we will be.
Yes.
The problem right now is that a lot of people talk about technology, but they're not doing it. Now, the colleges that you're talking about, they want to provide, I call it, Professor Marwala, McDonaldized skills. You know, quick. But quick doesn't help, because at the heart of it should be the requisite knowledge that should undergird what you do.
Yeah.
You can have the skills, but if you cannot interrogate that skill at the level where the concepts, the mastery of concepts is critical, then there's a problem. And I think that's key. The key is where universities come in. Our role is to ensure that when people come in, they come out with the mastery of concepts, they come up with the mastery of the soft skills which are needed, they come up with the mastery of the interpersonal skills, all these things. But we need to also ensure that aside, the actual manipulation, tinkering with technology is also key to that. So that balance, that synergy for me is very critical. And I think universities need to be moving in that direction where we can fortify our institutions to say we provide the knowledge, but hey, we can also venture into not allowing the other people to simply enter into our space because we are lying idle. No, we should be getting younger people who tinker and provide that tinkering platform, because it's about how you create synergies.
Maybe if I can add on that.
Please, yeah.
I agree 100%, but it all applies down to business models, and it's international, global, etc. And I agree with Prof's statements there. We need to have that specialized skills that's got long-term implications.
Yes.
But I think let's have a look at the most innovative nation in the world, which is the Swiss. Okay. And how do they cater for education?
Yeah,
for
well,
the
they're
future?
so innovative.
So their business model works like 30% of students are allowed to go to university. And 70% of students has to do some form of apprenticeship. Now, if I can put that into context, that is more like where the guys will go to the micro colleges for the apprenticeship. And apprenticeship is also technological apprenticeship, you understand? And I think that model was also applied in India. I mean, which is very similar circumstances that we've basically got. I mean, and in that context, I think that business model would assist South Africa to actually make sure that all areas are catering. Just to give you an idea, the most innovative, comprehensive university in the world, or let's just use it India, because we've got different universities here, is the India Institute for Technology. They've got a 1% acceptance rate. And if they students get accepted, they're already bought out by Silicon Valley and top companies and things like that. They sponsor everything, but they've got a 1% acceptance rate. But it works on the technological as well as the long-term philosophical aspects of what is needed.
Absolutely. Maybe just to add on that, I completely agree with you. And of course, the Indian Institute of Technology is a super institute. It's a traditional university, despite the name. It's just like MIT or University of Cambridge. But this idea that knowledge must always be accompanied with practice is very, very important. And we have been doing that. And I think education and the fourth industrial revolution actually allows us to be able to take abstract concepts and be able to play them into a classroom, whether it is in a group discussion or whether it is in a project, and so on and so forth. There is somebody who once said, knowledge without practice, or theory without practice, is misguided. And practice without theory is unstable. And I think we need to have both. And university actually does both.
I think we are starting to run out of time. I think what these last comments here, and I think, you know, it is something that all three of you have actually talked to, and they're hugely important. So this idea of having the theory practice, and we have in certain ways we've separated them, and there's almost a Cartesian dualism here that we need to forge our whole bodies again, which is both theory and practice. And I'd like to end to talk a little bit about, and I'd like to hear just a few quick comments on, isn't it so, and maybe I'll start with you, Professor Litseka, very quickly, that we owe it to our nation and to our students to give them this in order for our societies to advance?
I mean, you're absolutely spot on. I mean, when you look at a country like ours and you look at the challenges that we face, I mean, I was looking at the youth unemployment rate. You look at where we are. I mean, we are poorer. And it's exactly that. As a nation, I think we have an obligation to say, what are the footprints that we leave in terms of our contribution towards sustainable development goals, however we conceive them.
Yes.
And it starts with, how do we conceive the knowledge programs, how do we conceive the pedagogical and whatever that will allow our younger people not just to enjoy simple work but to flourish in life. That's key.
Yes. Professor Adendorf?
I think very importantly we need to become a knowledge-based
Absolutely.
nation. Now, knowledge-based means that someone has to develop that knowledge, which is the role of the universities as such. But I think we need to manage the change. This change is going to happen so quickly. We need to manage it, and we need to adapt quickly and things like that. The sad reality is that South Africa is not doing well in education. It's as simple as that. I'm not saying universities, I'm talking about school level, etc. But this is our feeding ground. This is our feeding ground. So we need to seriously address that. I have full confidence in our Deputy Chair in the Fourth Industrial Revolution to make a very big impact.
I'm going to turn to that specific Deputy Chair, Professor Mawala. I'm going to give you the last word, because this is important, isn't it? That actually we have a clear mandate. Higher education has always had a clear mandate to do the best for the students. And this is what we need to do, and the question that we're debating is how we do it. But I think that, you know, that mandate is important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, Professor Adendorf, you put it very well. This mindset that every student must go to university is not practical, and nor is it desirable. Only a certain percentage of students must come to university for us to have a viable economy. Some other people must actually go to trade schools. Trade schools to become plumbers. Of course, you can learn about plumbing in the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Yes, I was going to say that there's no difference there, really, is it? Because
exactly.
You know, all occupations
but certainly, we should actually capacitate that second tier. It's not a second tier; it's a different tier. Very, very important, you know, of teaching people specific skills, and these skills are also going to be needed in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Somebody will have to fix those robots. If you go to South African breweries and see their production facilities, somebody has to fix that. And the universities are not good at producing people who can go and fix those things. You know. But trade schools, FETs are quite critical. And as the University of Johannesburg, we are working very, very closely with those institutes. This building, when we bought this building, it was about innovation and teaching people to be innovative in building things, and it was linked to FETs. Let us capacitate that.
No, thank you for that. And I think that, you know, without sort of, you know, beating ourselves over the chest too much, but I think that, you know, we do have a role to play there. And I think this is also a space where we are good. Because supposedly, you know, we have trained others to be hopefully flexible-minded. We should be flexible minds, and we should be able to be so ourselves and truly do, you know, create tomorrow. And I think that listening to the three of you, I'm sure we can do it, and we will do it, eh?
We have to do it.
And I think that's the amazing. So thank you very, very much. It's been lovely talking to you, gentlemen, and I think that we've come a long way, and we will continue debating these questions.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you very
And thank you to all our listeners and participants at home. And then we haven't been able to pick up on all of the discussions that has been going on online. And there's been a lot of discussions and suggestions about solar energy and so on. But we'll pick up on that. And I hope you will tune in again to the forthcoming cloud debates that we're hosting here at the University of Johannesburg. And as I say, you can follow us online and you can log on to www.uj.ac/IR4 and find the previous cloud debates as well. Have a blessed evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
How are you?
Yeah, fantastic. Well done.
So how many have you done this cloud debates?
This is
How
the
many
sixth.
have we done? 6?
This is the sixth. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you see,